The Westminster Standards. This video covers material related to the Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 2, of God and the Holy Trinity. What is God? The Shorter Catechism tells us that God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. Let's break that down. When we say that God is spirit, we mean that he does not have a physical body. He is not visible. But he's not an impersonal force. He is personal. When we say God is infinite, we mean that he is without limit. God is able to do whatever it is that he wants to do. God is eternal. What we mean by this is not simply that he lives forever, but that he is without beginning and without end. God is unchangeable. Now, obviously, this means God is without change. And this is important because God does not change in his being like so much of our world changes over time. God is perfect in every respect. In his being, he is perfect. In his wisdom, he is perfect. He is perfect in power and in holiness. His justice is perfect. His goodness is perfect. And his truth is perfect. Theologians sometimes distinguish between what we call communicable attributes of God and incommunicable attributes. Communicable attributes are those attributes that are shared with human beings in some way. Incommunicable attributes are those that belong to God alone. So, for communicable attributes, there are attributes like love, wisdom, goodness, truth, etc. God has these attributes perfectly, and human beings have these attributes truly also, but to a lesser degree of purity. When it comes to incommunicable attributes that belong to God alone, things like immutability, infinity, omnipresence, we can only be in one place at one time. God, however, is everywhere present at all times. Now, as we talk about God, we need to make sure that we're not thinking of some generic God. We're looking at the God of the Scriptures. And God in the Scriptures is revealed as triune. Here are some basic but foundational truths about the Trinity. First of all, there's only one God. There are not three gods or many gods. There's only one God. And this one God exists as a tri-personality: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. One God, three persons. And each person, Father, Son, and Spirit, is fully God. The Father is fully God, the Son is fully God, the Spirit is fully God, yet there is only one God. Each person is distinct from the others. The Father is not the Son or the Spirit, and the Son is not the Spirit or the Father, and the Spirit is not the Son or the Father. But Father, Son, and Spirit are each distinct persons. We see this in how at the baptism of Jesus, the Father speaks, the incarnate Son is baptized, and the Holy Spirit descends from heaven as a dove. When we look at the relationships between each person, those relationships are eternal. The Father has always been the Father to the Son. The Son has always been the Son to the Father. And the Spirit has always been the Spirit to the Father and the Son. Those relationships are eternal. And we also need to remember that both God's oneness and threeness are equally important. We don't have three gods. God is only one God. At the same time, this one God is three persons. Now, there is a mystery to all of this, but this is what the Scriptures teach. And these basics help us to avoid errors that the Church has seen over the ages concerning the Trinity, such as polytheism, the belief that there is more than one God. The Scriptures teach there is only one God, not three, not thousands, only one. Unitarianism. This is the belief that only the Father is truly God, and that the Son is probably a created being or something like that, and that the Spirit is an impersonal force or power of God. And then there's what's called subordinationism. This is the idea that the Father is truly God, and the Son and the Spirit are lesser divine entities. They're still divine in some way, but they are not really and ultimately God the way that the Father is. And then there's modalism. This is where God is seen as one person who plays three different roles at different times, like an actor in three different movies. For example, think about the actor Leonardo DiCaprio. He plays three different characters in three different movies. DiCaprio plays Jack Dawson in The Titanic, Frank Abagnale in Catch Me If You Can, and Dom Cobb in the movie Inception. All three of these characters are very different people, but they're played by the same actor. That's the idea of modalism. The problem is that when we see what the Trinity is actually like, we realize that the Father doesn't become the Son, and the Son doesn't become the Spirit. There's only one God who is eternally Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then, of course, there's what may be called adoptionism. The belief that Jesus at some point in his life became God. Some people have said that they think he became God at his baptism, or at his resurrection, or at his ascension, but he started off as merely human and then became God sometime later. All of these errors in the way we think about the Trinity have been repudiated by the Church over the centuries. The doctrine of the Trinity is essential to our faith because when we understand our salvation, we have to understand that the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, all three persons, are very active in our salvation. The Father planned redemption for the elect before the foundation of the world. We call this election and predestination. The Son accomplished this redemption in time through his incarnation and atonement and resurrection. And then the Holy Spirit applies this redemption to the elect. We call this effectual call, regeneration, sanctification, and ultimately glorification. If some of those words are unfamiliar to you, we will get to them later in the series. One last thing we need to cover as we look at this chapter of the Westminster Confession of Faith. It's regarding the word passions in the confession found in chapter 2, section 1. It's there we read that God is, quote, without body, parts, or passions. Now, some people have been very confused about this, so let's just take a moment to talk about it. It would really be helpful for us in our understanding of this statement that God is without passions to make a distinction between what we might call affections and passions. Affections would be those dispositions which are voluntary. They're under the control of the will. They are rational. Another way of saying this is that the affections are those states of mind in which we actively choose to exhibit something, like I choose to love someone, I choose to rejoice with someone, or I choose to mourn with someone. Passions, on the other hand, would be those dispositions which are involuntary and in some sense non-rational. Another way of saying this is that our passions are those states that come upon us, and we experience them somewhat passively, like when we say, "You make me mad," or "I feel depressed today," or "Oh, that's just another one of his mood swings." So in summary, affections are chosen by a person, while passions overtake a person. Now, the Confession of Faith is basically saying that God doesn't have an emotional state that overtakes him. God does, however, have affections which he chooses to express or display. This means that God is not prone to mood swings. God is always in control of his emotional life, so to speak. And he chooses to love, he chooses to hate, he chooses to be angry or to rejoice. If we make this distinction, it seems appropriate to say that God is without passions, yet this is not the same thing as saying God is without affections. God's affections are not like the overwhelming feelings we experience with human emotions, but they are nonetheless analogous to those feelings. Or perhaps it would be better for us to say that our feelings are actually analogous to God's affections. This distinction keeps us from the problem of a stoic, uncaring God, obviously not the real God of Scriptures on the one hand, while keeping our doctrine of God's immutability intact, unlike the process God of open theism, where he's always changing and becoming something different. So that's it for Chapter 2 of the Confession of Faith. If you have any questions, make sure you write those down. You can send them to me ahead of time, or we can simply discuss them at our in-person meeting.